Let me ask you a real question. Have you ever felt the shift? Everything was flowing. The connection felt solid. The conversations were easy. And then suddenly something changed. The messages slowed down. The energy felt different. And without warning, you found yourself wondering what happened. That moment right there, that's where panic tries to move in. Your mind starts racing. You replay conversations you thought were good. You question things you never questioned before. You start wondering if you said too much, asked for too much, or were too much. And before you realize it, you're blaming yourself for someone else's distance. But let me tell you something important. Distance does not automatically mean rejection. Sometimes it means life is revealing information. And information, when you handle it right, can protect you instead of hurting you. Tonight, we're not here to chase anyone. We're not here to beg for clarity or force connection. We're here to learn how to respond with strength, wisdom, and self-respect when someone starts pulling away. Because how you respond in moments of uncertainty says everything about how much you value yourself. This is about emotional maturity. This is about dignity. This is about knowing when to pause, when to speak, when to focus on yourself, and when to walk away without bitterness. If he's distancing himself, you don't lose your power. You reveal it. What I'm about to share with you will change how you handle distance forever. Ignore these truths, and you'll drain yourself trying to fix what was never broken. Apply them, and you'll either restore balance or make room for something better. You win. So take a breath. Sit with this moment. Let's talk about what to do immediately. Don't panic, pause with purpose. The very first thing you must understand when someone starts pulling away is this: panic is natural, but panic is not productive. Panic makes good people do unnecessary things. Panic makes smart people say the wrong words at the wrong time. Panic convinces you that something is ending when, in reality, something is simply changing. And if you don't learn how to pause with purpose, you will talk yourself out of peace before the situation even has a chance to reveal the truth. When distance shows up, your emotions immediately try to take control of the steering wheel. Your heart starts racing, your thoughts start spiraling, and suddenly every unanswered message feels personal. You begin replaying conversations, reading tone into silence, and creating stories that may not be true at all. That's why pausing is not weakness, it's wisdom. A pause gives your mind time to catch up with your emotions. A pause gives you clarity before you create chaos. Here's the reality most people don't want to hear. Not all distance is rejection. Sometimes it's stress. Sometimes it's pressure. Sometimes it's confusion. And sometimes it's a person trying to figure themselves out. If you panic too quickly, you turn a temporary space into a permanent problem. You start pushing for reassurance before the other person even understands what they're feeling. And pressure, no matter how well-intentioned, rarely brings people closer. Pausing with purpose means you stop reacting and start observing. You watch patterns instead of isolated moments. You notice whether the distance is consistent or occasional. You ask yourself if their actions have changed or just the timing. This isn't about being suspicious. It's about being emotionally intelligent. Emotional intelligence says, let me gather information before I make a move. Immaturity says, I feel uncomfortable, so I need answers right now. Let me tell you something important. Calm is powerful. When you don't panic, you communicate confidence without saying a word. You send a message that says, I am secure enough to sit with uncertainty for a moment. That kind of energy changes the entire dynamic. People respond differently to calm than they do to anxiety. Calm invites honesty. Panic invites avoidance. Pausing with purpose also protects your dignity. When you panic, you tend to over-explain, overshare, and overextend. You start doing emotional gymnastics trying to prove your value. But your value does not increase because you panic. Your worth is not measured by how quickly someone responds or how much attention they give in a single moment. When you pause, you remember who you are. You remember that you were whole before this connection, and you'll be whole after it too. This pause is not about playing games or pretending you don't care. It's about self-control. It's about saying, I care enough about myself to respond wisely instead of emotionally. There is strength in restraint. There is maturity in silence. And there is confidence in knowing that you don't need to chase clarity. You can wait for it. Pausing with purpose also gives the other person room to show you who they are. When you stop filling every gap with questions, explanations, and emotions, people reveal themselves. They either step forward with intention or they continue to drift. Either way, you gain clarity. And clarity is always better than confusion, even when it's uncomfortable. Most importantly, pausing keeps you grounded in reality instead of fear. Fear exaggerates. Fear lies. Fear tells you that distance means loss. Purpose reminds you that distance can also mean redirection, reflection, or revelation. When you pause, you choose not to let fear run the show. You choose to trust yourself enough to wait, watch, and decide your next move from a place of strength. So when distance appears, don't panic, breathe. Slow down, pay attention. Give yourself the gift of time, because the moment you master the pause, you take back control, not over the other person, but over yourself. And that is where real power begins. Match energy, don't overcompensate. When someone begins to pull back, the most common mistake people make is trying to close the gap by giving more than they're receiving. More texts, more explanations, more effort, more availability. And while that might sound loving, what it often becomes is unbalanced. Overcompensating doesn't strengthen a connection. It quietly weakens your position in it. Matching energy is about balance, not coldness. It means you remain kind without becoming clingy, attentive without becoming anxious, and interested without becoming desperate. When you overcompensate, you unintentionally send a message that says, I'm afraid to lose you, instead of, I value myself, and fear is never attractive. Confidence is. Here's the truth people struggle to accept: effort should feel mutual. When one person is constantly adjusting, chasing, and stretching to keep things alive, the connection starts to feel heavy. You end up doing emotional labor that should be shared. Matching energy protects you from that exhaustion. It keeps the relationship from becoming one-sided without you having to argue or explain yourself. Overcompensating usually comes from a good place. It comes from caring. It comes from wanting things to work. But good intentions don't cancel out bad patterns. When you give more than you receive, you train people how to treat you. You teach them that they can show up halfway while you go all the way. And once that pattern sets in, it's very hard to undo. Matching energy is not about mirroring behavior out of spite. It's about staying aligned with reality. If someone is communicating less, you don't punish them. But you don't fill the silence with anxiety either. You keep your rhythm. You stay steady. You don't abandon yourself just to keep someone close. There is power in restraint. There is power in not rushing to respond every time. There is power in letting silence exist without immediately trying to fix it. Silence reveals intention. When you stop overcompensating, you allow the other person to either step up or step away, and either outcome gives you clarity. Matching energy also preserves your self-respect. When you're constantly overgiving, you start to feel small. You start questioning why you're trying so hard for something that isn't meeting you at the same level. But when you match energy, you stay rooted in your worth. You remind yourself that connection should feel natural, not forced. Let me be clear. Matching energy doesn't mean shutting down emotionally. It means staying emotionally regulated. You're still warm. You're still open. You're still yourself. But you're not chasing validation. You're not auditioning for attention. You're not trying to convince someone to see your value. People either recognize your value or they don't. Overcompensation often masks insecurity. It's the belief that if you don't give more, you'll be forgotten. But the truth is this: the right people don't need to be reminded to care. They don't need excessive effort to stay engaged. When someone values you, consistency feels easy. Matching energy also keeps communication honest. When you overcompensate, you cover up issues instead of addressing them. You smooth over gaps that should be noticed. But when you match energy, changes become visible, patterns become clear, and clarity is always better than comfort built on imbalance. You have to trust that your presence is enough. You don't need to increase your effort to earn space in someone's life. Your time, your attention, and your emotional availability are valuable. Matching energy ensures that those things are given where they are appreciated, not taken for granted. So instead of leaning forward when someone leans back, stand where you are. Stay grounded. Stay aligned. Let effort be mutual. Because when you stop overcompensating, you stop negotiating your worth. And that changes everything. Check your boundaries, not your worth. When someone creates distance, one of the most dangerous habits you can fall into is questioning your worth. You start asking yourself what you lack, what you did wrong, or why you weren't enough to keep their attention. That internal conversation can quietly erode your confidence if you let it. But distance is not a measurement of your value. It is an invitation to examine your boundaries. Your worth is constant. It doesn't rise and fall based on someone's mood, availability, or ability to show up consistently. Boundaries, on the other hand, are choices. They define what you allow, what you accept, and what you participate in. When distance shows up, the real work is not proving your value. It's deciding what you are willing to tolerate. Too many people confuse boundaries with walls. Boundaries are not about shutting people out. They are about protecting your emotional health. They clarify where you end and where someone else begins. Without boundaries, distance feels like rejection. With boundaries, distance feels like information. And information helps you make better decisions. Checking your boundaries means asking honest questions. Are you available for inconsistency? Are you okay with mixed signals? Are you shrinking your needs to keep someone comfortable? These questions are not meant to judge you. They are meant to wake you up. Because when you ignore your boundaries, you slowly teach yourself that your feelings matter less than someone else's convenience. When your worth feels shaken, it's often because your boundaries were already loose. You gave access without clarity. You offered patience without accountability. You stayed quiet when something didn't sit right. Distance didn't create the discomfort, it revealed it. And revelation, while uncomfortable, is necessary for growth. Healthy boundaries are rooted in self-respect. They sound like knowing what consistency feels like and refusing to settle for less. They sound like understanding that communication is not too much to ask for. They sound like recognizing that your emotional needs are valid, not negotiable. When you hold boundaries, you stop bending yourself into shapes that don't fit. Checking your boundaries also means recognizing when you're overextending. Are you always the one initiating? Are you always adjusting your schedule, your tone, your expectations? Overextension often comes from the fear of loss. But when you constantly stretch yourself to keep someone close, you end up exhausted and unseen. Boundaries remind you that connection should be reciprocal, not draining. Let's be clear. Someone who is meant to be in your life will not be confused by your boundaries. They may not always agree, but they will respect them. Boundaries don't scare the right people away. They filter out the wrong ones. If asserting your needs creates distance, that distance was already necessary. Checking your boundaries instead of your worth also shifts your focus from approval to alignment. You stop asking, do they like me enough? And start asking, does this situation align with who I am becoming? That shift is powerful. It moves you out of insecurity and into intention. Boundaries require courage because they force you to accept outcomes you can't control. When you express what you need and hold your line, the other person gets to choose how they respond. They may step up or they may step away. Either response gives you clarity, and clarity is kinder than prolonged confusion. When you honor your boundaries, you send yourself a message of self-trust. You remind yourself that your feelings are reliable, your standards are reasonable, and your presence is valuable. You stop negotiating your peace for potential. You stop waiting for someone else to validate what you already know. Distance is not always a loss. Sometimes it's a signal that your boundaries are evolving. Sometimes it's proof that you're no longer available for what once drained you. And sometimes it's the space required for you to remember that your worth was never the issue to begin with. Communicate once clear and calm. When distance shows up, silence is not always the answer, but chaos never is. This is where communication matters, and how you communicate matters even more. Too many people either say nothing and suffer quietly, or say too much and lose control of the situation. Communicating once clearly and calmly is the balance between self-respect and emotional honesty. Clear communication is not about unloading every feeling you've been holding inside. It's not about defending yourself, proving a point, or forcing reassurance. It's about expressing your experience without blame and stating what you need without pressure. When emotions are high, restraint becomes a form of strength. Calm communication shows maturity because it says, I trust myself enough to speak without exploding. The reason you communicate once is simple. Repeating yourself doesn't create understanding, it creates resistance. When you keep bringing up the same concern, the message stops being about clarity and starts feeling like control. One intentional conversation reveals far more than 10 emotional ones. It gives the other person a chance to respond honestly instead of defensively. Being clear means you speak from your own experience. You focus on how the situation feels to you, not on accusing the other person of wrongdoing. Accusations invite arguments. Clarity invites conversation. When you communicate calmly, you lower the emotional temperature of the moment and increase the chances of truth coming out. Calm communication also protects your dignity. When you beg for attention, over-explain your feelings, or demand immediate answers, you give away your power. Calmness keeps you grounded. It reminds you that you're not asking for too much. You're asking the right person. If someone reacts poorly to calm honesty, that reaction tells you more than any explanation ever could. Communicating once also requires trust. Trust in yourself and trust in the process. You trust that you've expressed yourself clearly enough. You trust that you don't need to convince someone to care. And you trust that whatever response you receive is information you can use. This kind of trust keeps you from spiraling after the conversation ends. Listening is just as important as speaking. When you communicate once, you must be willing to hear the response without interrupting, correcting, or defending. People often listen only to reply, not to understand. But understanding gives you clarity. Clarity tells you whether the distance is temporary, intentional, or unavoidable. Sometimes the response is reassuring. Sometimes it's uncertain. And sometimes it's silence. Silence after clear communication is still communication. It tells you where someone stands without them having to say it out loud. Calm communication allows you to accept that truth without chasing closure. This approach also prevents emotional burnout. When you constantly explain yourself, you exhaust your spirit. You replay conversations, rewrite messages, and relive disappointment. Communicating once ends that cycle. It draws a line that says, I've spoken my truth, and now I will observe. That line brings peace. Communicating once clearly and calmly is not about controlling the outcome. It's about honoring yourself regardless of the outcome. You're not responsible for how someone responds. You're responsible for how you show up. Showing up with clarity and calmness ensures you walk away with your self-respect intact. This kind of communication reflects emotional maturity. It shows that you don't need drama to be heard. You don't need intensity to be understood. You don't need repetition to feel valid. You trust that the right people will hear you the first time. When you master clear and calm communication, distance loses its power over you. You stop guessing, you stop assuming, you stop carrying emotional weight that isn't yours to hold. You speak once, you listen fully, and you let the truth reveal itself, without force, without fear, and without losing yourself in the process. Focus on your life, not their moves. When someone starts creating distance, it's easy to make them the center of your attention. You start tracking their behavior, analyzing their timing, and measuring your day by their responses. Before you know it, your energy is invested in monitoring someone else's actions instead of nurturing your own life. That shift is subtle, but it's dangerous because it pulls you away from your purpose and hands your peace to something you cannot control. Focusing on your life is not avoidance, it's alignment. It means remembering that your happiness, growth, and direction existed before this situation and will exist after it. When your attention stays locked on someone else's moves, you pause your own momentum. You stop moving forward while waiting for someone to decide how close they want to stand to you. Here's the truth. Watching someone too closely creates anxiety. Anxiety clouds judgment. And when judgment is clouded, you start making decisions from fear instead of clarity. You read into small changes. You imagine meanings that were never spoken. You react to possibilities instead of facts. But when you redirect your focus back to your own life, your nervous system settles and your thinking becomes clear again. Focusing on your life means staying engaged with what fulfills you. Your responsibilities, your goals, your creativity, your friendships, and your growth deserve your attention. These